Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about Rocky from 1976. In a follow-up podcast, we'll be talking about the whole series of Rocky films.
Yes, we have watched them all.
Yeah, I've done 4.5 of them in one day, which is quite a trial.
I've limited myself to one a day because, I did want the space to think about them.
Yeah. well, I started late, so I had to catch up. But today, just Rocky. So why are we talking about Rocky?
It's an ongoing interest of mine. I remember having this conversation, with kind of an early boyfriend, when we were talking about people we like to see. And, whether you fall, that there were particular stars that you liked or something. Mm. And, I remember saying, when I was like 14 or 15, I vowed to see every film that Sylvester Stallone, John Travolta, and Christopher Reeve ever made, because, when you're like 14, and you start going to films, and these are the people that became stars at that moment, right? Mm-hmm. So, Stallone in 1976, and, Travolta, who was already a name on television, and Welcome Back Kotter, and he'd been in Carrie, but he really became like a huge movie star in 77, and then Christopher Reeve with Superman, which I think was also 77, right? And then, of course, it was a joke because, I vowed to see every film they ever made because I like them so much. And then, of course, the first few films after this come out, and you think, forget about it. So this film was a real sociological phenomenon. I mean, I think the success of it. So I was talking to a friend about Creed, right? Which was also a big hit. It made over 100 million. But it's incomparable to Rocky, right? Because I think Rocky made, I think it was 174 million or 154 million or something. But this was this was in the mid 70s, right? Mm-hmm. Where, a big success was like 20 million or things like that, right? So this was like a runaway kind of success, right?
The figure on Wikipedia has the global box office of 225 million, and it also notes in brackets that's equivalent to just over $1 billion in today's money.
It was the number one film of the year at the box office in the US for 1976, and it also made the charts in 1977 because the film was released, I think, in December or something like that. Yeah, and the run extended into 77. So, I mean, it's not reliable because I saw the Variety chart, which mentions it at number one. And then, there was, I think, the Theater Owners chart, and another one that I got from the internet that lists it as the number 2 film at the box office in 77.
Right.
Yeah. But if that's true, a number 1 film in 76 and then still a huge box office in 77. It was a real sociological phenomenon, the film.
And I'd never seen it. The only Rocky films I've seen are Rocky Balboa and Creed. I saw Rocky Balboa at the cinema, and I had a really, really good time in that. And then Creed was, something slightly different because it was this reboot that focused on a different character and a different milieu, right? It was about this black American. Obviously, race comes up throughout the Rocky films, but the focus is very different.
I think race is absolutely essential. It's embedded into all of the films. Some of the stuff seems kind of a struggle to be inclusive, of black people and black experience, but that nonetheless comes across as white supremacist. Like the black guy always gets beaten. The black guy who is the champion of the world ends up, you end up applauding him because he ends up as the trainer to the champion. They're very...
Well, when they don't lose every fight, so at the end of Rocky, spoilers, Creed wins on a split decision, but Rocky has won the hearts of America. He's lasted the distance, which is what he wanted. Yeah. And actually, right at the end, when the decision is announced, Creed's win is announced, it happens in the background. You almost can't hear it because it's all about Rocky finding Adrian and kissing her.
It's a very unusual film because, you see, people say it's a boxing film, and in a way, it's not. Or if it is, it doesn't follow the genre conventions. Because boxing films are all about masculinity, which this one is as well. But they're also a critique of capitalism, and the American dream. There's always gangsters, and the fight is fixed, and the working class guy has to give up his body, to win. And then he gets seduced by the city. So there's always a bad girl. Yeah, there's always the home girl who he loves, but then there's the bad girl who seduces him into this capitalist way of life. This film has none of that.
No, very little of it. I think it hints towards the aspects of having to sell your body, but it's not really... He doesn't suffer physically, right, the way you would in another film.
I think the opening shot of the film, right, which in a way is so crude, really, but it tells you what the film's going to be about. So there's this image of Christ, in the resurrection, the host. And then the camera pans and you see these men fighting, And I think for me the film is about that, it's about resurrection. It's about kind of, a man kind of being given a second chance and being redeemed by love, right? Like the accent, so you do see 10 minutes of fighting, right? Yeah, but what he's fighting for is, Adrian, I love you. So winning the fight is a means to this declaration of love, and it's actually Adrian who redeems him. It's not the fight itself. This is not about beating the system it's not about money. It's not even about success, right? Like, he doesn't want to enter the fight. He doesn't want a rematch at the end, It is really about him finding himself, through the belief of Adrian, really, and of his love for Adrian. So really, it is a love story, aside, much more than the typical boxing film allows, let's say.
It's also about what he says when he's in bed with Adrian and he's kind of worrying and he's talking about the fight coming up. He says it's not about winning, it's about going the distance, which is something that comes up in a few other films, particularly Rocky Balboa. It comes up in that because he's so old and the whole point is, can he fight this young champion?
Yes.
And can he prove it to himself? It's a theme that doesn't feel... It feels like if it was better integrated, it would come up earlier in the film. I kind of believe that's what he believes at that point, but it's interesting that maybe it's just a failure in some sense, that it only comes up at that point, this idea that actually how will the fight go and what I want out of the fight specifically.
Yes. I mean, I think for me, what's interesting, because it's not a good film by any definition, it's not, I mean, I think Stallone said he wrote it in 3.5 days. And the joke among screenwriters in Hollywood was, well, I could have written that in 2.5, right? Like, it's so crap, right? Like, I mean, he's not a genius because he wrote it in 3.5. I mean, he wrote it in 3.5 because it's pretty crappy, right? So, and, it is a film that's made up of bits and bobs of other films. You see On the Waterfront, I could have been a contender. There's actually even almost lines that come out of that. An enforcer in the docks,
And they say bum a lot.
A lot, instead of a bum, which is what I am. So you can see kind of clear references to that and, to other films. So it's kind of a bit of a mess. And really, I think visually, it's very poorly directed. I mean, I pointed you, there's a scene in the corridor in Adrian's flat with Paulie, and you can see that it's staged for the actors, but it's not staged for the camera, right? And so it's so sloppy in many ways. But Pauline Kael in her review says, well, if the film might have been any better, it might have been worse. There's something about the awkwardnesses, a little bit of the derivativeness, the fact that, it's not slick, that actually makes it work. And what I'm interested in is actually what makes it work, because when I saw it recently, much less this time, but I think that's just, because I've got Rocky and
on the brain.
But the first time I was deeply moved, kind of, it really touched me, kind of emotionally. Like the ending sequence, it was like I welled up, and there were moments in the film that kind of, got me emotional. And I think, they all have to do with the good-heartedness of the film, the sincerity of it, the kind of... I saw an interview with Stallone, and he was saying, because the film was nominated for an Academy Award, and the other films were Taxi Driver, All the President's Men, Bound for Glory, and Network. And he was saying that they were all the films of that era, maybe not Bound for Glory, actually, but, they were all cynical, and critical, and kind of, it was all that was wrong with America, and whereas his film was upbeat and innocent, and that there is redemption is possible, that there are second opportunities, that the American dream is there, even if only through a freak accident. I also wonder to what extent it's Stallone himself.
You were mentioning on Facebook, because as you were watching these films,
yes,
you were making comments and so on, and there was a conversation happening all week. And one of the things I thought was very interesting was the idea that Stallone is like immune to irony in a way that other stars of the 80s are not. And they always comment on themselves, or they comment on the films they're making. And throughout the Rocky films, they are completely sincere. Yes. There's not a note of irony in any of them. And actually, towards the end of the series, or the more recent entries in the series, that really gives them a lot of power. And I think it gives this one a lot of power as well.
Actually, one of the interesting things, Andy Medhurst made a very good point on Facebook where he was saying Arnold Schwarzenegger is loved by the Chatterati, he says, because the films are ironic, right? Whereas Stallone has kept faith with his proletarian roots, right? And that, certain kinds of irony are only available to middle-class people and above. And I was thinking actually how true that is, because, you need a lot of cultural capital to be ironic, you need to know the structure of things to be able to play with them, and actually you need to have a large vocabulary to play language games and to deflect something, and so there is something about that which I think is very interesting, that has to do with the film's sincerity, and also with the film kind of being unashamed about the way that it talks about intelligence and says, oh, I'm dumb, or kind of my dad said, work with my body because you don't have much brains. It doesn't say it as a personal fault, right? So you being stupid, which normally has this connotation of you being lazy, you being uneducated, but like it's somewhat your fault, right? Whereas actually, kind of the film has an attitude, well, some people are born intelligent and some people are not, right? Like, kind of, and there's nothing wrong with, not being born intelligent. Some people are beautiful and some people have great bodies and some people are rich and some people, are intelligent and some people are not rich or intelligent. That's just the card you've been dealt with, right? So, there's no self-pity or a derogatory perspective on it. It's just that's the card you've been dealt with and then you've got to work with it, right? So I think kind of that was also to me very interesting,
Yeah, and very endearing.
You can see why the film made Stallone a star, and it did, right? Like, the year after he was number one ranked star, in the Quigley list. And this is also why these films are so interesting, because if you look at the film stars of the early 1970s, it's Robert Redford, Paul Newman, Warren Beatty, Jack Nicholson. You move from the mid-70s on, and you begin to get Pacino and De Niro and Stallone and Travolta. There's the whole Italian gang that kind of begins, well, Pacino a bit earlier. So actually it reinflects this idea of America. America now encompasses ethnicity in a way that it still doesn't do with race. And Stallone is a part of that. So he's working class. He's ethnic. He's not bright. But actually, the thing is, I think, he's incredibly beautiful in this in a way that it almost like I'd forgotten or it never registered, right? Because he's always been very fit and so on. But there's something about the way he's filmed here, with that kind of alabaster skin with the rosy edges and, those wonky, like Picasso eyes and those incredible eyelashes, right? Like, he's kind of beautiful in a very manly way that is, that was new, kind of. It's a new type of person in cinema that he represents, and he's incredibly good, right? He's giving a performance. Like I was noticing with you, just the way that he moves and the way that he trains. He's got like his shoulders hunched, and he does this wobbly walk. It's a performance that he's given in a way that he's not that he. I mean, actually, I don't think he ever gave again, right? Where, what he does in the other films is he presents his star persona, right? But he doesn't work at presenting a person, right?
And he presents his body.
Yeah, and he presents his body in a way that, again, one of the surprising things here is that the body is not put on display.
No.
right? Like
when he's training, he's got a t-shirt on.
That's right.
You don't really, well, me see that maybe a bit later on, but he's showing off his torso an awful lot more in the later films.
Yeah, and when he wants to make an impression with his body on Adrian in the scene in the flat, where he takes his jumper off and he puts his hands right to show off his pecs, he's still wearing a I forget what you call them.
Undershirt.
Yeah, it's one of those.
A vest.
A vest, yes. I think the American slang was a wife beater.
I think we have a bit of that over here. Well, wife beater is also Stella Artois in these parts.
All right, okay. So,
yeah, but he's showing off his arms, but he's not like, you imagine that in Rocky 4, he'd be topless and covered in oil.
Rippling abs or whatever, right? Pulsating veins. I mean, he's wearing a t-shirt and he's just like showing, his arm. So I think all of that is very different. And
also you were saying he looks more like a boxer. So we were saying in the latter films he looks like a bodybuilder.
Yes.
And actually boxers don't look like that. They look like they do here. They're muscly and they're toned, but they've got some chunk to them.
Yes.
Right? They're not like, they tend not to have really ripped bodies.
I want to read you a little bit of Pauline Kael's review. So this is on Stallone. So there's a bull-neck energy in him, smouldering. He has a field of force like Brando's, and he knows how to use his overripe cartoon sensuality. The eyelids at half-mast, the sad brown eyes, and twisted, hurt mouth. Victor Mature also had this thick sensuality, but the movies used them as if it were a simple, plushy handsomeness, and so he became ridiculous until he learned, too late, to act. Stallone is aware that we see him as a Hulk, and he plays against this comically and tenderly. In his deep caveman's voice, he gives the most surprising, sharp, fresh shadings to his lines. He's at his funniest trying to explain to his boss why he didn't break somebody's
fingers.
Yeah, and he's funny talking to his turtles. He pulls the whiskers off the film's cliché situations so that we're constantly charmed by him, waiting for what he'll say next. He's like a child who never ceases to amaze us. Stallone has the gift of direct communication with the audience. What separates Stallone from a Brando is that everything Stallone does has one purpose: to make you like him.
Yeah. He
may not know how good he could be if he'd stop snuggling into your heart.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Well, that definitely came up. I don't know if that came up again on Facebook or something like that, but it's definitely occurring to me. Throughout the entire series, he wants you to like him.
Yeah.
Always. There's not even a question of him being any kind of antagonist. I don't know many... I've seen very few Stallone films, really. But I don't know how often he ever really was an antagonist in cinema.
Well, the Rambo films, I suppose he's meant to be an outsider and so on. But, he still wants you to find reasons to love him.
Yeah, absolutely. And that certainly comes across here. When you were saying earlier about the kind of new form of masculinity he's presenting on screen, you're describing rosy cheeks, alabaster skin, long eyelashes. It's a feminine masculinity. There's a feminine aspect to the way he looks.
Yes. There is something about Stallone's hulkiness, yeah? Because Kael talks about how, he looks repulsive one moment, and really beautiful the next. He doesn't look repulsive to me at any point, but you can see what she means in a way, yeah? That, he's not there like Burt Lancaster in his early films where he just looks like a god, right? Like, he's chunky and he's got a weird face and, yeah, so I think there are moments where to me he looks very beautiful, but also he's almost very unabashedly ethnic macho, yeah, in his way of speaking, his way of talking. I really love the silences, yeah, or the way that he sometimes doesn't react, yeah, that kind of, he's not overeager, yeah, he's somebody who's got confidence, yeah, who doesn't need to please, yeah, so he'll react to things, yeah, but he's got a stillness, yeah, so I think all of that is what made this film, I think, and what made him as a big star. There's a
huge element of like softening the Hulk aspect to him. Everything around that is softening it. And it occurs to me very early on watching the film as well that him being an animal lover.
Yes.
It's a big part of that. He loves animals, he gets on with them. He's walking down the street after his first fight and he says hello to the cats in the window. He says hello to the dog, he's got the turtles. He says hello to the birds in the cage. Every time he sees an animal, he can't keep away from it.
I remember reading the Mad magazine. Mad magazine used to do films all the time, right? And the bigger the films, the more often they do them. And the film has absolutely instantly recognizable. They're not set pieces in our modern understanding of what a set piece in a film is, but scenes that have become iconic, let's say, that were so recognizable that, audiences found so endearing, that they occupy like a separate place, in an imaginary. So, the scene of skating, which is a courtship scene, and it's really lovely, right? Because, kind of she's skating but very poorly, they're not meant to be there. He's trying to win her over, he's running on the ice, kind of it's where they reveal that they're almost like two halves of the of the same,
they fill each other's gaps.
Yes, they fill
which is a lovely idea.
And for it to take place like in the skating room context, which is on Thanksgiving Day, it's a scene that if you just show an image from it, a certain generation will instantly attach an emotion to that, right? So that's one. The thing with the turtles is another. The pet shop is another. The running up the steps, to the museum is another, like iconic, right?
Punching the dead cow.
Yeah, the punching the dead cow, iconic image, right? And then, of course, kind of, the end with, like, the yelling of the Adrian, right? Like, so he just finished a boxing match, but his first thought is on his woman, on the woman he loves, right? I mean, that's an incredible amount of moments for a film to carry generations later and to, for them to still be recognizable in those ways. And by recognizable, I don't just mean iconic in the sense, that there's an image that everybody recognizes, but that actually there's a feeling that everybody attaches to that image. So that makes for very powerful cinema, even though it may not quite be good.
So if we think about the filmmaking, there must be good moments, right? You're talking about, you mentioned the ropes in the boxing ring at the end being red. And you said this is the most dazzling, most exciting visual thing in the entire film.
Yes, it's true.
And I mean, you mean that as a negative, because there's nothing else.
Yes.
But,
well, that whole thing is meant to be a bicentennial thing. The setup is, red, white, and blue, which makes it also, if you think about it, to a step further, awful, right? Because it is about America, and one of the things that it could be saying about America is, that white men are under threat by black men who've got to be beaten.
Could be.
That's certainly, there. But I was thinking more just that those red bars on the ring add a vibrancy, that the film is lacking. So, again, credit to Pauline Kael. She says this is one of those films, and I think by implication one of those stupid films, where, to signify kind of poverty, you've got to make everything look brown and dark and dreary, right? This film has that. She's right.
But I think it also gives it a really great sense of place. I think you feel like Philadelphia in this film. Where he hangs out, and when he's running, and it's a training montage, isn't it, before the fight, and he's running, and eventually gets up the steps and celebrates. But there are shots of him running through streets coated in litter and trash.
It's very much actually my response to it was, it's the East Coast of North America, and I recognize that as a place. It's a place I grew up. I think, don't be stupid. Montreal, it's like, the architecture of Montreal is all these winding staircases outside the houses, so in a way it's nothing like that. But actually, so obviously it's not Montreal, but it is East Coast North America. The type of brick houses and those corner shops, and it's kind of... And
junkyards and train yards and all these kind of blue-collar areas. Train bridges in the background. There's always a train going by somewhere.
Yeah, I think you're right. It very much has a sense of place, So this is from Lester Grindon's book on boxing. And he says, the film highlights the initial bout with a contrast between the divine and the human, the soul and the body. This is the first opening shot. And suggests a principal theme of the boxing genre, the boxer's transformation. But in Rocky, the conflict between body and soul is renegotiated as the common man realizes his spiritual destiny through a renewed faith in his physical ability. What do you think about that?
Something that the Rocky films, maybe it's something that boxing films almost always make me ask is why you fight. There's always some question raised in them about why do I fight?
Yes.
And how fighters fight or whatever. And sometimes, it's answered as I have to sell my body for money. Here it's not. It's something that I feel alienated by in almost every boxing film somehow. Like, that sense of I do this because I have to. Or something like that. The idea of Rocky being, renewing his belief in his own body or something. What did you say?
In his own physical ability.
Does he ever? Does it seem like he's lost his faith in himself at any point?
Yes, he's an enforcer for the mob, a low grade enforcer. Yeah, he collects money for the mob, for very low down gangsters. He's doing it as a hobby. He's reaching 30, right? He's lost his locker, so he's on his way out. Really, So, yeah, and actually, I think it's Adrian, who gives him the faith, and that it's something he can do.
Yeah, that may be the case, but the character strikes me from the beginning as someone who's confident. Like, he's already pursuing Adrian from the start, and he doesn't like that his locker's been taken away from him, but it didn't seem to signify that he was on his way out exactly to me. He's always confident, and then when the fight comes up and he speaks to Creed's manager, and he turns it down, he's not confident that he'll win. He thinks he'll make like a laughing stock of, I guess. But that doesn't speak to like a low confidence to me. Like, that's quite a reasonable sort of worry.
Well, let me put it another way. He comes across as very self-assured as a man. Yeah, he knows who he is. He knows he's strong and powerful and can maybe beat anybody who goes up against him. So he's got that kind of self-confidence. But I don't think he's got the kind of confidence that says he could have been a contender. He actually doesn't see himself as a contender. The whole thing is is a surprise. It's a chance. It's luck. It's thrown on his lap, right?
Yeah.
And he does have a line where he tells the Burgess Meredith character, where were you when I needed you 10 years ago? And the other guy says, well, why didn't you ask, right? And part of the character is that he's somebody who other people thought he could have been somebody. Yeah, that he could have been a really great boxer. But actually, he himself never thought about it or pursued it. Or, he asked, why didn't you ask for help?
Yeah.
So I think Adrian gives him the self-belief, really, and in a way he does it for her. So I think there's something kind of there. One of the things that I find very endearing about the film, very contrary to contemporary crude moralizing, is, so on the one hand you could say, the film has heart in a very simple-minded way, but actually I think the film's heart, in quotation marks, extends across the film. Right, so Rocky isn't judged because he works for the mob. Yeah, the mob boss is really nice and gives him $500 to train with no strings. Yeah, Paulie is a drunk, right, and that's okay. Yeah, that's part of being human, and so it's not that the film isn't aware of the perils of that or the danger or the self-destruction about that, but it accepts it as part of being human. That's the way Paulie is. Yeah, he's got his own burdens to carry, right? And so you understand everybody's reasons in a way, that now, he's an alcoholic. He should, go on a 12-step program, right? Or he should fix it, or everything is fixable. Whereas actually, kind of this just accepts it, kind of people have to make do. People have to get on with life in the best way that they can, and people have different choices, right? And some people don't have many choices at all. So I think that's also the way that the film, to me, has heart. It doesn't, it doesn't say, oh, you filthy gangster, or you get the feeling they're not being gangsters for fun. So I like that very much, but I forget what you were asking. I feel I've lost.
I don't know.
Thread. Well, let me ask.
It's something that doesn't connect. There's something about the film that doesn't connect with me, and kind of, Adrian believes in him, and I don't actually really feel their relationship. It did kind of make me emotional at the end when after after he's finished the fight, he's won his personal fight of going the distance. He's looking for her straight away and doesn't care about the result. But I didn't really get their relationship, to be honest.
Oh, I did. And I think audiences got it because to me the relationship is central to the success of the film. Mind you, it's not that I don't have problems with it. I think that the way that the Adrian character is conceptualized, I was going to say borders on the offensive. I'm sure actually it doesn't border. I'm sure many women would find it offensive, right? Because, what are her hopes and dreams and, what made her so shy and so recessive? Like, kind of the film doesn't give you any of that. It's all focused on him.
And the scene where Rocky goes to kiss her, and it's kind of sensitive, but I mean, I was watching it thinking on her side, she says, "I don't really know you very well. I'm in your flat. You're a much bigger person than I am.
Yes.
You basically got me up against a wall in that very claustrophobic shot,
Yeah.
And he says, I want to kiss
no
you.
means no.
He says, I want to kiss you. You don't have to kiss me back. It's like, well, you don't. Why should I have to kiss you at all?
Yes. No, I mean, I think those things now. Well, as you say, it's weird because you can see how sensitive the filmmakers are trying to be about it, right? They're trying to be very delicate with the whole thing. But actually, how Me Too it comes across now.
Exactly, yeah.
So there is definitely that. But I think the film in its crude way explains, they are each other's missing half, right? So kind of that's what connects them. They found each other, right? And that's what saves them both, really, So I think if you examine it too much, it kind of falls apart. But, operating on a crude level, that is what the film's about. And that, I think, is what connected to audiences. That, it kind of fits into this, it's like a Cinderella fantasy, really, in a way, right? For both of them, yeah? But also, from his perspective, there is a kind of a macho, I was going to say masculine, but maybe it's just, But anyway, he knows what he wants. He knows what he needs. It comes his way, and it hasn't come his way before, you get the feeling, yeah? So, and he pursues it, right? And then kind of, she's so important to him that, he kind of pursues it, right? And then they find each other, and it's kind of clear, how that shifts. Yeah, the moment that they find that they fit each other is narratively the turning point in the film, So, and I think it's that aspect that connects rather than the boxing.
Yeah. Something else that I kind of missed, really, even though on paper it's sort of obvious, is it's what does Rocky want, actually? It's kind of fundamental. It's a fundamental thing to ask of a character. What do you want?
Yes.
And obviously he wants Adrian. But out of his boxing, out of his career, and this is why I always think, this thing about fighters fight and what do they fight for, it often passes me by. I kind of think, what does this character want out of his boxing? He seems to be someone who, this is the impression I got, is someone who is basically content with his place in life, which I think kind of jives with what you were saying, because you were saying other people wanted more for him than he wanted for himself.
Yeah.
So, he's working for this low-level gangster, breaking legs or what have you, or not breaking legs as it happens, and he's getting on with his boxing, and this thing falls into his lap, and I suppose in a sense one of the things that's endearing is that he immediately turns this down because he's like, no, I can't do this is too big for me. It's kind of an endearing aspect to the character, but I am left wondering, why actually am I interested in this guy? Because I am interested in the guy. And I think it's in the way he stumbles around the city, just getting on with dogs and cats and people, and the way in which he's always got a funny, comment to make about something, or the way he knows himself and that kind of thing. That's what I think I grab onto with the character. But actually, I don't get much any sense of this guy's kind of wants and hopes. Other than Adrian, it's all about Adrian.
It's all that's what's so interesting, because you see, I think that's the answer to the film, because the boxing is almost like a decoy. It's the film is in some ways about being a man in America for sure, right? But what this man is feeling, he's unemployed. The situation, the work situation is terrible. They're living in very considerable poverty. People on the streets, fires, detritus everywhere. He's really lonely. Yeah, he's an orphan, right? Yeah? And you do get an acute sense of loneliness in him. Yeah, like kind of, his apartment's empty. Yeah, all he does is he goes to work, and he comes home to a lonely place. He has turtles he talks to, right? So I think you're meant to feel that, this is someone who's really lonely. Yeah, and what he wants is what Adrian represents. And the figure of Adrian is almost like the woman in the Western, that it doesn't matter who she is, she's just a function normally, right? And what she represents is civilization, church and schools and home, and kind of, the coming of civilization to the West. I think there's something about the figure of Adrian in this here as well, so what he wants is her, and not just her in herself, but also what she represents, an end of loneliness, a recreation of the family, a building of a future together. And in fact, actually, the subsequent films will,
Well, they turn it into a soap opera.
They work on all those themes. So,
I didn't get a sense of it as an end to loneliness.
Oh, I did.
That's what I maybe am missing. Like, I never got a sense of this guy being lonely. I got a sense that he wants to hang out with Adrian because he likes her and she's there. And it will be fun, but not as, like, you complete me.
Oh, yeah.
I know I said that thing he says, we fill each other's gaps, but still...
I got that very much, you complete me. Actually, that moment where he rejects her because, he's in the sofa and he's just, come from jogging, I think, and he feels all beaten up and, and he's abstaining because he's training. And the moment where she goes into the bedroom and then she comes out and he wraps his blanket over her, you really got the sense of these are, two people who understand each other and who are one. That was a visual moment, one of the rare ones in the film.
Yeah, no, I get it like once they're together, but before they're together, that's not a feeling that I get, that this guy exists in a state of loneliness. Even though on paper, it's all there, as you say, the empty apartment.
Well, I think you see that's
it's not a feeling that I get.
To me, that's what they have in common. Yeah, because she's shy and recessive, and can't express herself and, can't talk to people, and she's obviously very lonely, even though she lives with her brother. Whereas, he knows the whole neighborhood by name. Yeah, he chats to everybody. Yeah, but then he comes home alone and he's very lonely. Yeah, kind of. He's talking to turtles. So I got, that's what I got out of it.
Not feeling I got. It's too outgoing.
Well, I never felt that either. I don't see him as being outgoing. Actually, I see him as someone who's at ease in his milieu, right? So if you grow up in a neighborhood, people by name, in that kind of urban setting. But actually, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're, that you are. Outgoing, it's kind of, I don't know, it's like me in my village, you just know everybody, you say hi, but actually it doesn't, and if you see him talking to interviewers or kind of talking to receptionists, and you see all the awkwardnesses, right? He can't speak, he has no confidence in that exchange, right? And that really comes across in all the interviews.
Yeah, but I think that's because he's out of his depth there. It's a new world to him.
Well, that is also true, that he's out of his depth and it's a new world. But actually, to be outgoing means that you have all these social skills, to at least try to do that. And I think the character makes it clear that those are not his social skills. And actually, even, for example, the exchanges with the driver who keeps insulting him, and the only way that he has to react is almost through physical force, right? I.e., he's not verbally dexterous.
No. But also that guy does deserve a punch in the face.
Well, that too. I mean,
well, it struck me early on that, as it's been mentioned during the week on Facebook, Creed is a Muhammad Ali figure. But the difference that really struck me between Creed and Rocky was how you almost never see Creed training. Creed's always in his office. He's wearing a lovely suit.
He's a businessman.
He's exactly. He's a businessman. And actually, there's that point where he's talking to all these various people, and there's only one of them just sat in the background watching this interview with Rocky where he's punching the meat. And he says, Apollo, you better come look at this. This guy means business. And he says, I'm all about business. Different kind of business, right? Like, that's obviously this kind of very central difference that the film's building between the two of them. And outside of it being that he's a Muhammad Ali figure and therefore is black, I'm trying to think, would it make as much sense if the character was white? Right? How different would it feel?
Well,
how important is it to that character that he's black?
Very. I mean, first of all, at the time the film was made, it was like, as you said, it was Muhammad Ali's peak, right? So, there's always, I mean, if there hadn't been a black figure in the film, the audience would be saying, are you crazy? Like, kind of, all the champions and the contenders of the last 10 years have all been black, and you're making this white. I mean, there would have been a reaction to that, right? So, second of all, there's something interesting about the way that the film tries to manage race, right? So Apollo Creed says, don't be like me, study, use your brains, yeah? So he becomes like kind of the establishment figure, yeah? Instead of, so this switches things around. Yeah, Apollo Creed lives in the mansion as the establishment figure, study, yeah. Stallone is from the ghetto, even though it's a white one, yeah. But then also the performative elements that are so Muhammad Ali, right? When he comes kind of dressed as Uncle Sam, and he's, there is to me it made me think of the blaxploitation films, right? And, all these pimps wearing fur coats, there's something kind of, let out of the box, or, a kind of performativity of black masculinity and male power, but one that could only be performed in certain spaces. Kind of, and in relation to gender. You see that, when he's coming out into the boxing ring, it's like a circus, right? Or a carnival, or, So the film would have been very different, I think, had the opponent not been black. But the fact that it is black is, so the film tries to maneuver through all of these pitfalls, potential pitfalls. But I think nonetheless they're there. Kind of, this is about, imagine how insulting it is to think that a 30-year over-the-hill boxer can beat the world champ, right? And why? Because he's white. I mean, if you made the film with all black boxers, you'd have to find other rationales, right? Like, if you made it with white boxers, it would be unbelievable to begin with, or, kind of, unless like Raging Bullets in a period setting in the 50s, right, or the 40s, right? But in the 70s, like you have to have a black boxer somewhere along the line. But then it does become about the white man beating the black man.
Yeah, in a manner of speaking, like, because he technically wins, agreed, but the victory in the film is not his.
Well, I think that's also a way the film so intelligently massages that issue. Yeah, so he doesn't win, but he wins.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's almost like a little bit like, the criticisms of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, where you have Sidney Poitier, who's a Nobel Prize winner and beautiful and gorgeous and, has a fantastic job. And, the parents oppose him, courting this young girl. Why? Because she's white, because she's got nothing else going for her, right? Like, So, the film sets up these things where, a 30-year-old over-the-hill, untrained, boxer with very little, like, first-class experience, Yeah. I mean, there's a kind of a racism in that, right?
Yeah.
So, a residue. One that was not examined, and this is the way racial and ethnic politics shift and change over the years. because I think there was such a celebration of the ethnic dimension to this film. Yeah, the fact that it was Stallone, that it was Italian American, that also felt like an inclusion, right? Because even though there'd been Sinatra in the 40s and 50s, a very famous Italian American, you know, he was like blue eyes and, you know, so, you know, kind of, when Pacino and Stallone and so on came out, there was like a kind of a recognition of a different type of ethnicity that was nonetheless fully American, yeah? And I think there was such a celebration of Stallone in relation to that the racial dimension was maybe a bit underanalyzed, though it's very much, the film bends itself into all kinds of things to manage that. And I think it tries to manage it ethically, but nonetheless, you know, you really do get a kind of a white supremacist feel that you then later get in the other films, you know, because you have montages of Rocky beating this black man, and then they throw in a white one just to make sure that you're not reading it as fully racist. Right?
Yeah. At the start of Rocky 3, right, when he's become world champion.
Yeah.
And he goes through his history of beating up black men.
Yeah.
To become the world champion.
Yeah. And, you know, this is then the series kind of very interestingly takes up and reinflects and so on with the Creed films, yeah? And redresses. And I suppose that's what we'll talk about in our next podcast. But to wrap this up, what are the things that kind of struck you most about watching it, just to summarize?
What really ultimately struck me most and what kind of affected the way I looked at everything was Stallone's persona.
Yes.
And that thing that we mentioned about how he wants to be liked and he wants to be likable. And there's not a moment in the film where he isn't, I don't think. You know, to the point where he's tolerant of some fairly bad behaviour from his friend Paulie, for instance, who treats his sister like shit. That's what took me through the whole thing. Like,
if the film is about redemption, I also think in a way it's about redeeming working class masculinity, right? Because I think one of the things that touched me is that I thought, well, you know, I grew up with a lot of like sweet galoots like this, right? Like, you know, kind of people not very well educated and a bit rough and, you know, kind of maybe also not that bright. But who were good people, you know, and they were very sweet and kind of, and had kind of an emotional sensitivity. Yeah, they were vulnerable as well, yeah, and sweet, yeah, and kind of, you know, helpful to others, yeah. And I think for me, the thing about Rocky is that he's all of that, yeah. So on the one hand, you know, he's a killer in the ring or whatever, but actually he's kind of, you know, a really sweet guy, inarticulate, he's sensitive. There's that scene where he says, you know, well, I just didn't touch, it didn't hurt me or whatever when someone said, and then, you know, when he leaves, he says, it did, yeah, that he's got feelings as well. So, you know, on the one hand, you know, having the strength, but also kind of the sweetness and vulnerability, yeah, kind of, that often I think is something that working class men are denied. Yeah, feelings are for, you know, middle class people. You know, so I really love that about the film, and it actually really touched me. So, on that note, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Yes, we will be returning shortly with a podcast on the series as a whole. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.